As the 2024 election approaches, service delivery issues force people onto the streets across the country. But it's protesting the only war for communities to get an audience with their leaders. While to delve deeper into this, we're joined by Naledi Modise, a voter behaviour expert from the University of the Northwest. Good morning to you, Naledi, and thank you so much for joining us so early in the morning. Just looking at the psyche of protesters as well, that the only other currency they have is to demonstrate in the streets and cause disruption so that they could be heard. Your view?
Good morning, and good morning to the viewers. Well, protest has been a legitimate way in which South Africans can voice out their concerns because we have a history of protest. When you look at, the transition from the apartheid regime, one of the reasons we ended up going to the negotiation tables was as a result of the prolonged strike action from the 1970s right through the 80s. Also, just after the negotiations for the transition began, around 1993, again, after the assassination of Chris Hani, when the protests re-erupted, that's when the election date for the new democratic elections were established. So protest has been a way to really put pressure on government and has acted as a catalyst for social change in South Africa. So it is part of our political culture, it is a part of our political social fabric, and it has proven to be effective over the years.
But when it comes specifically to service delivery issues, I understand what you're saying, that back during, the fight for liberation, the common enemy was that segregation, inequality and separation. But now we're dealing even with the triple social issues, not only of unemployment, etc., but where people live, the lack of resources, and for them also being frustrated for not being heard. What is the common enemy here?
The common enemy is really an unresponsive government, So issues of service delivery, issues of inequality, joblessness, issues, and I think now in the forefront lately has been issues of the cost of living, the energy crisis in the country, provision of water. All those issues have been there in the past, and people have, there have been civil society organizations that have tried to put this to government's attention, but there hasn't been a real response and real action that has been taken to ensure that these concerns are addressed efficiently and to the satisfaction of South Africans. So because elections take place once every 5 years, and we do know that we have a crisis of voter turnout, protests then become the one way in which South Africans themselves are able to voice out these frustrations. And most importantly, as we've seen lately or in our history, this is the one way in which then politicians respond, create these interministerial task teams, and address largely or to a certain extent the concerns of the communities themselves. So without these protests, which put pressure on the political actors, we have seen that there's a disengagement even from government to respond, or there's a dragging of feet of sorts to respond to the concerns of the ordinary citizen.
Now, would you say that the government interventions have been misaligned to the needs of the communities? For example, if there's a natural disaster in one particular area, then communities are moved to another alternative, which brings us to where Deep Sloot had emerged, and now we're sitting with a problem there where there are still concerns around lack of service delivery. Do you think government's interventions are not necessarily aligned?
I think that government's interventions are more reactive more than they are proactive, and that's why they seem misaligned, because there isn't sufficient time for planning to ensure that when you do move people who are affected either by natural disasters or by some catastrophe, that they will be able to either stay in that area long, but also stay in a conducive environment. And that's why then 10 years, 15 years later, we have these service delivery protests, because it almost seems as if after the event has taken place, government provides this response, but then does not follow up to ensure that the quality of life either improves or that there is service delivery that is provided to those individuals. So it almost seems as if the people then are being forgotten, which then creates the problems, of course, of a society that lives without the necessary social tools in order to survive.
And the role of the media as well in highlighting and putting a spotlight on the plight of the poorest of the poor, which in the main remain to be largely black and coloured, possibly even Indian, some Indian communities. The issue is, how then can they address their concerns in a more structured way, as you had referred to civil organizations having engaged government without any or much success?
I think that the people are really doing the best that they can with what they have, and which is why the media plays a significant role in highlighting these events. For instance, now we're talking about the protest issues or the protest that's currently taking place in Diepsloot, and we're doing so on a media platform. So I think that to a large extent, the media does help to facilitate the conversation about the service delivery issues and the service delivery protests that are taking place across the country. I think communities have really put their, and this is also part of our transition into this new democratic dispensation, they really put their trust into these political office bearers, which to a large extent they've been let down by. And so the only other way is protest, and the media does a great job of facilitating this. And we do see now a mushrooming or a re-emergence of a vibrant civil society, which also helps to facilitate this conversation. So I think that the three stakeholders are able to really bring government to account. Firstly, bring the issues to government, and secondly, ensure that there is a sustained conversation about these issues so that they're not forgotten in the background once, for instance, an interministerial task team has been established. But then there's also follow-ups and continued dialogue about these concerns.
And also going into the elections, of course, people have to be careful in the selection that they make, that it's not just based on sentiment or historical behavior. Now, as you're saying, the governments, whoever comes into power, needs to be able to deliver on that which the community has been crying for.
Absolutely, and I think that South Africans are rational voters. We have seen a history of that, in the sense that they really consider their votes extensively. They don't just vote for, as we have seen. So the sentiment or the voter behavior trends have changed, in that people are no longer voting along, historical legacy, but rather around issues of provision and service delivery. And South Africans are really reflecting on who are the political parties that are speaking to our needs, who are the political parties that are seemingly responsive to the concerns that we have voiced over the years. And so they are making their mark in that way. I think the concern for 2024 really is not around who will vote, who will vote for which party or what the kind of voter trends will be, but rather voter turnout, because what we need is for more people to go to the polls as opposed to disengage from the electoral process completely.
Yeah, and that has been a concern, voter apathy, and especially amongst young people, but it is a constitutionally fought for right that we all should exercise. But thank you indeed for your time this morning. That's Naledi Modise, an expert in elections and voter behavior from the Department of Political Studies and International Relations.